class. We're getting near the end of class. We had to talk about that one more week. Today we're going to talk about the age of the earth. Okay, and why this matters is obviously and we've spent time on this, the evolution folks are needing millions of years for evolution to happen because the probability is so low, they just got to have a long, long, long time. And of course, we look at it and go, look at the Bible record, and it doesn't look that way. So we're going to talk some about the age of the earth, some about fossils that don't quite make sense in that, and how they have come out with going through different age records. And then we're going to talk about what the Bible says about the age of the earth and the different theories that some feel they have to have a theory to get the Bible aligned with the millions of years stuff. So some folks think, well, it's millions of years, but I got the Bible, so how do I get those two to match up? And it doesn't. But some folks want that. So old earth, young earth. And this is the creationists are saying, it's a young earth, it's 6,000 years old roughly. And then the others are saying, it's 500, 600 million years old or older. And how do you get to this? Time, as poets and insurance salesmen remind us, is the enemy of life. But time has friends too, with our great, incomprehensible, immeasurable stretches of time to fall back on. The evolutionists would be, without them, they would be sitting ducks for, the queries of even a high school kid to go, how did this happen? Time is the evolutionist refuge from the slings and arrows of logic, scientific evidence, common sense, and the multiplication table. And that quote was by a person named Sandra Hall and Marcia Hall. It's difficult to overcome this, what they call scientific truth that they lay out, but the actual evidence is of a young earth. So on the handout, you can see these different eras. The Precambrian age is 500 million to 4.5 billion years old. The Phanerozoic is 590 million years to the present. And then they break down that into the Paleozoic, which is the age of the Trilobites. And so Trilobites are little fossils they find, imprinted in the rock. I remember years ago there was a Far Side joke, and you got these cavemen looking at a rock that's got an imprint of a bug in it, and the one says to his buddy, "Can you imagine how fast that bug had to have been flying to do this?" Of course, we know that it's like the rock forms around stuff, not that it's like it hit it that fast. So you have these different eras. We're on page 30. The Paleozoic age can be broken out of the Cambrian, the Ardovus, or it's like the Cardovians or something. I can't say all these words. I did think it was interesting because I typed these in and I was real careful when I typed them. And every one of these words is in the spell check. Because I thought, well, you're not going to see words like this in there. They're going to come up, and it's like, nope, they're on the spell check. They expect you to use these words. I guess I don't know enough, but so you got this period. Then you've got the Mesozoic Age, which is the age of the dinosaurs, and that's got the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous periods. And of course, we've seen movies about Jurassic Park, and so we kind of think of that. And then you got the Cenozoic Age of the mammals, so that's even later in time or newer, closer to us. So you have these different periods, and then many of us were taught in school that because they've come up with names for these periods, that proves evolution.
Yeah, I remember learning these when I was like in middle school.
Man
Yeah,
made the names.
yeah, but I
Yeah,
remember
you
Mesozoic and Cenozoic and all that,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like we named it, so
Yeah.
it's real. Okay, well, it proves evolution. No. So you have these periods of time, and you got to kind of know, see that to understand how they've broken it down and these, millions or billions of years. But we're going to talk some about fossils that they find, and they use the age of the rocks to kind of date the fossils, and they use what the hell they think the fossils are to kind of date the age of the rocks. And that's interesting logically to have this sort of circular reasoning. So man, though, when you look at the scale, we're like the last 1,000th of this period of time. So man comes at the very, very tail end of this period, according to the evolutionary people. Now, the next section, it talked about this man named Albert Engels, who was the geologist for the state of Kentucky. And this was back some time ago, I want to say in the 40s, if I recall right. And he was the state geologist, and he was an evolutionist, but he stumbled across human footprints in coal. And coal is supposed to be 250 million years old, and man's only supposed to be like 4. And it's like, wait a minute, there's footprints in this coal, this rock, or this material that was compacted and turned into coal over 250 million years. So man walked on this material and left footprints, and then it turned into coal, and here we find them. He didn't just find them in Kentucky. He found them in Missouri, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and then even out west towards the Rocky Mountains. So once he got to finding these fossils footprints, he found them all over in coal. They tended to be from 5 to 10 inches long, and they've been found on the surface of exposed rocks, but they also turn up in the coal, when they split the coal. And they look like human footprints. There's pictures in the book. It's like, it looks like a footprint. They're kind of wide, or what they would call splayed, and they were made in what would have been soft mud at the time that turned later into rock. And they're from the upper Carboniferous period, 250 million years old, 5 toes, an arch like a human foot. A lot of the ones in Kentucky were 9.5 inches long, 4.1 inches broad at the heel, and the width at the front by the toes was about 6 inches. They know that they were by a biped, a upright walking animal or human, because there's no front footprints. And also the way the footprints are aligned, they're not like a four-footed animal tends to walk more in a line, and when it makes a turn, it's different. A human that's sitting here, and they'll just point their feet every direction. So a four-legged animal is going to have left a different set of prints out there too. So they know it was something that walked upright. And they found them in Pennsylvania, Missouri. I named a bunch of states. Some criticize it because they say they're too splayed, they're spread out. But then when they look at footprints from people, modern people that live in like the rainforest and don't wear shoes, their feet are splayed. So if you don't wear, your shoes kind of help keep your feet tight.
That's plain.
Yeah. And so that it's like the ones that criticize it for saying, well, the toes are too spread out. It's like, well, if you walked around without shoes your whole life, your feet would look more like that. So they have modern humans that have feet like that. So Dr. Engels went to explain this away. He said they look like human footprints. He goes, if man or even his ape ancestor or even the ape ancestor's early mammal ancestor existed as far back as in the Carboniferous period in any shape, then the whole science of geology is so completely wrong that all geologists will resign their jobs and take up truck driving. Hence, for the present at least, science rejects the attractive explanation that man made these mysterious footprints in the mud of the Carnivorous period with his feet. So it's like this, no, we can't have that. That doesn't work for us. And really, science is supposed to not reject the data, but reject what they've determined from it. You don't you abandon the theory or you modify it. You look at the data. The data is the facts. And they were saying this was the only place where they do that. Well, that's in today's world. We've got other areas where we reject the data and just say this is how the science is. Where, you know, you've got someone testifying before Congress this last week, I think, that men could get pregnant. It's like, okay, you need to go back and work on that a little bit more. So he finds this. They asked him to write an article for Science Newsletter. It was October 29th, 1938. And they said that the picture, he had photos of them. The picture, they say, the quote caption was, "They aren't human, but they look enough that way to fool almost everybody. They are footprints made ages ago by a still unknown animal in the late Coal Age." So practically anyone who sees them thinks at first they were made by human feet. It's stated in the article, and it is almost impossible to persuade some people they were not. A further puzzling fact is the absence of any tracks of front feet. So they were struggling with the data that they found. They've also found, and I don't think it's in the handout, but they found in coal, because you know you burn millions of tons of coal, so you go through a lot of coal, and you know it's old. So they found in Texas, in 1936, a metal hammer with a wooden handle was dug out of Cretaceous limestone, purportedly 135 million years old, near London, Texas. The handle was broken. It was 6 3/4 inches long, and the head was strong metal. In Illinois, in 1891, there was a missed colt of Morrisonville, Illinois. I don't know where Morrisonville is. May not even be there anymore. 1891. She dropped a shovel full of coal into her cooking range, and out of a lump broke in two, and she discovered a golden chain of intricate workmanship, coiled and embedded in the coal. And this coal, you know, it's got to be hundreds of millions of years old. They've also found in, let's see, 1883, they found a sewing thimble in a lump of coal. In 1915, an iron pot was discovered in a coal deposit that was estimated to be 300 million years old.
Who verifies something like that? I mean, you know, if I saw something along with coal, I'd probably go ahead and bust it and burn it. But
yeah.
I
mean, surely in those few cases, folks were like, man, I can't believe this, you know, and they, you know, so it would have been local, you know, local news. Everybody's got to go see the, you know, the piece of coal with the thimble sticking out kind of thing.
my granddaughter this week lost a tooth and it fell in her cereal she was eating, so she could have said, "Oh, looky here." These old turkeys.
Right, and you could, you know, you could say, well, okay, a little gold chain, you know, maybe the coal had a crack and someone dropped it and it fell in the crack, you know, because, you know, a chain's thin, it could do that. but a thimble or a hammer or a frying pan is a different thing. You know, they're not gonna accidentally get mixed in with it. 1889, they dug up, they were boring a well in Napa, Idaho, and they had a figurine that was like baked pottery figurine come up that they said it was in an area that was 12 million years old, and it was a man-made type thing. Okay, so we talk about that. We talk about the Trilobites, which are, they call an index fossil. And I mentioned this, they use index fossils to determine age of rocks, and they're used to date the layers, but then they also use the rocks to date the fossils. So it's kind of a circular reasoning. In theory, trilobites flourished 500 million years before humans, but they have found in the same rock footprints, shoe footprints, and trilobites in the same stone. So not just barefoot, but imprints of shoes. And then there are other ones that they talk about. Eric von Fange, 1974, said they found a fossil leather sole imprint with a double line of sewing stitches in Triassic rock that was 225 million years old. They found fossil sole imprints with visible sewn thread in coal, estimated at 15 million years old. And they found flint carvings on extinct reptilian bones estimated to be 180 million years old. Now again, that one you could maybe explain away, because maybe some guy found a 180 million year old bone in his yard and said, I'm going to take up carving scrimshaw in my yard, and he carved it. And so the carving could have been done later. In fact, I noted a little bone in my yard when I was mowing this week. I could go out there and carve that. Actually, I think I'll stay away from it. Okay, any comments on coal, finding things in coal?
I like what you've got at the bottom of page 30 there. The men stop believing in God.
Yeah, they believe in nothing. They don't believe in, but they'll believe in anything. Yeah, it's interesting what folks will believe in. Okay, I think we're up to page 31, the polystrate fossils. Okay, polystrate means layers, so you've got multiple layers of rock. And polystrate fossils are fossils that go through multiple layers of rock. So they look at the rocks and they go, this layer is this many million years old, the next layer is a few million less, and then the next layer, you know, these layers are laid down, layers of sediment, like every time the river floods, it lays down a little, you know, a fraction of an inch of sediment, and those build up with time, and with heat and pressure, they can change into harder rock. But you find fossils that are in multiple layers of rock, at least 2 layers, and they find many, many tree trunks that are in 2, 3, or multiple sections of rock that were laid down over millions of years. Well, a tree trunk, you know, it's going to rot. It can't be left out here, and it's not going to exist for, you know, it might be there for 20 years. You can have a tree die, and it's standing there for a while, and then sooner or later the wind's going to blow it down, and you know, bugs are going to eat on it, and it hits the ground, it's going to rot in no time. But they find tree trunks that are standing through rock that they claim to be millions of years old. It's gonna rot, it's not gonna turn into a fossil. Now, you can have fossilized wood, but it's gotta happen, you know, it's gotta be like submerged and then it happens. It's gotta be deposited rapidly, like a catastrophic event. We talked about that a little bit last week about how, you know, evolution would tell you things happen to have a super slow, and creation's like, no, it happens bang at one time. And so they find these fossils that sort of point to things happen, a catastrophic event like the flood, the Great Flood. So in Oklahoma, they found reed-like creatures known as Calamites that can be 1 to 6 inches in diameter, and their stems are very fragile once they're dead, because they usually are found, it's like just ground up to like powder. But they have found these fossils through multiple layers standing up, and there's no way that they could have happened over millions of years. Okay, they found catfish in the Green River Formation in Wyoming. So they'll find polystrate catfish that are, you know, through multiple layers of rock. And, you know that if a fish dies, you know, you go out to the lake here and there's fish dead on the bank, and they're not gonna be there a week from now. You know, it doesn't take long for, you know, birds that eat on them, they just rot. It's quick.
Older lasts longer.
Yeah, it's gonna stink for a while, but they don't last long. If you get a chance, go tour Kentucky Dam. I don't know, I think they're doing public tours, and it's a neat little tour. But one of the things you'll notice is the dead fish that wash up to the dam. And when it's hot, it stinks outside. Okay, so one of the most famous is in 1976, they discovered a whale near Lompoc, California. And this whale is like 75 feet long, and it's standing on its tail at a, not straight up and down, but at a pretty much an angle mostly up. And it's covered by diatomaceous earth. And diatomaceous earth is microscopic algae that have been fossilized. So, and they use it in a lot of different products. It's like in kitty litter, and it's in a bunch of different products that they dig up this diatomaceous earth and use it because it's sort of absorbent and it's interesting stuff. It'll be in like potting soil, just different things. I think it's in some cattle feed. So they find this whale standing almost on its tail, completely covered by diatomaceous earth. There's no way a whale could have stood upright on its tail for millions of years while these layers of diatomaceous earth built up. It would have been decayed, it would have been eaten by scavengers. It just couldn't happen. But it's there. So the record is there. And you could argue, okay, well maybe it was laying flat, and then, you know, they had an earthquake and it tipped up more. But a whale is still tall, and it's, you know, even if you're thinking instead of 75 feet of layers, which is going to take millions of years, it's only like 12 feet tall or however tall it was. That's still forever long. I mean, it's going to rot in a short time. I remember a hammerhead shark washing up on the beach when I was a kid. And, you know, they knew it was going to stink and rot on the beach. And so the men went out there with shovels and dug a hole in the beach and buried it. They pulled teeth out with pliers so you could have teeth. That was sort of fun. But they dug a big hole, and I mean, and it was stinking like the day it washed up. It's like, we got to deal with this. Any comments on polystrate fossils? Okay, let's move into what does the Bible say about the age of the earth? And, some people want to compromise and make the Bible line up with what science says. And we know we've read Genesis 1 through 11, chapters 1 through 11. Some people are going to suggest that the Bible doesn't restrict the age of the earth. We're going to look at 3 theories about that. And there are these theories that try to accommodate the billions of years. And those 3 options are basically you've got 3 things could happen. You could have time before the creation week, during the creation week, or after the creation week. We're going to add billions of years into this week. What they got to do, they think they got to do. So the first one is called the gap theory. And this theory, let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. So Genesis chapter 1, you're just getting fired up here, it should be near the front of the Bible. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So we're going to work on that before you have the 6 days of creation starting in verse 3. So in the gap theory, these folks take that and they said, okay, God created in verse 1, He created a fully functional earth complete with animals, plants, and humans who lived before Adam. This is their plan. That creation, the theory suggested, was destroyed as a result of the rebellion by Satan. So when Satan rebelled, it was on earth, and he was killed, or earth was destroyed. They didn't say Satan was destroyed, but earth was destroyed because of Satan's rebellion and war with God. So that's their theory. You don't read about that in the notes of verse 1, but that's the theory. And then they say that left the planet because of the destruction of that war. That's what left the planet without form and void. It just was that way because it was that way, but they claim that's what caused that. And that's what caused all of the fossils that are on Earth. Because when you had this big war and Satan was destroyed, all of these things were destroyed, but it had been going on for millions of years. And that's where your fossils come from. And then in Mark chapter 1, verse 2, God recreated or restored the earth in 6 literal 24-hour days.
That doesn't make any sense, because if they believe one thing, why do they believe the other?
Yeah, well,
I mean, if they're going to believe God, why don't they just believe it the way He is?
I agree. Yeah, this doesn't make any sense. I think there's like 6 reasons this doesn't make any sense. So, it obviously blatantly contradicts Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, where it states, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day." If God made everything in 6 days, how many things did He not make during those 6 days?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't make a whole nother earth that was destroyed. He made everything in 6 days. Second, that there's no biblical evidence to substantiate the claim that Satan's rebellion against God took place on earth and caused the destruction of earth. Okay, we can read, there's not a lot of detail, but we do read about Satan's rebellion, the creation of hell. There's a little bit of that, but none of it says this happened on earth and destroyed the earth. So when you read about what that Satan's rebellion, it doesn't support this. Also, that gap theory is falsely because it implies humans died before Adam and Eve. And we know that death entered the world as a result of Adam's sin. So 1 Corinthians 15:21 is on the sheet. For as by man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. And then a little farther down, 1 Corinthians 15:45, thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. So we can see, it talks about Adam being the first man. There, Paul wrote that, and death coming with man, Adam was the first. It's also inconsistent in that Genesis 1:31 tells us God created everything God had created was very good. Okay, and again, the word everything, it doesn't say, it would be hard to get like, well, God created this whole other earth, first earth, and it wasn't good, and then it was totally destroyed. Well, no, it says everything He created was very good. Okay, so we also, they want to talk about, well, there was death before Adam. And if you look at, well, on the page is Romans 5:12, therefore just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. And then we know, of course, Adam was the first living man. And then, of course, what they try to do is talk about that you had all this death before then, and the Bible, there was death before Adam. Well, the answer is there wasn't any deaths of humans before Adam. Plants and other animals could have died before Adam died. So one cannot claim there was absolutely no death of any kind prior to Adam and Eve's sin, because plants or other animals could have died. But these verses deal with human death, and so we cannot say there was any human death before Adam. So there's also, that's kind of the working through the gap theory. So any questions, comments on the gap theory? You got to give them an A for picking up something that bizarre. Satan and his fight with God, caused the whole world to be destroyed and without form and void. Okay. I don't think so. But there are folks that'll take like one verse out of context and come up with a whole deal. So the one that you hear the most often, will go on into page 32, is the day-age theory. And this is, if you're going to hear a theory about the millions of years, this is the one that's the most common. And basically they try to argue that the days in Genesis 1 are not literal 24-hour periods. So, and they will turn to Psalm 90 verses 3 through 5. You return man to dust and say, return, O children of man, for 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Or to 2 Peter 3 verses 8 and 9. But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. The Lord is not slow to fulfill His promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, that all should reach repentance. Okay, so they look at these verses that say 1,000 years is a day. What, does it say 1,000 years is one day in verse 8? It says 1,000 years as one day. Similar, it's not saying it is a day. But that, when we look at this one, and this is the one you probably need to study a little bit harder because it's not, I mean, it's more common. Okay, so we see what they would claim there could be 7 long days. But we look to the word that's used. They were trying to be real clear. Moses was trying to be clear that this was 6 24-hour periods. And they used the Hebrew word translated as day as yom, Y-O-M. And whenever it is preceded by a numeral, and we're talking about a non-prophetical passage. So there's passages of prophecy that may use the word yom and it doesn't mean 24 hours. But in non-prophetical passages, as in Genesis 1, and whenever it has a numeral in front of it, it always carries the meaning of a 24-hour day. And then every time that it's used in the plural form, yamin, Y-A-M-I-M, in a non-prophetical session, it's always a literal day. The Old Testament uses the word yamin in this manner more than 700 times. Always means a literal day. It's not, if it's non-prophetic usage, it's always a literal day. So when Exodus 20:11 states, for in 6 days, and that's yamin, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, there can be absolutely no doubt that the text means 6 literal days, because it's not a prophecy, and then whenever it uses the number, it's like it's a day. Third, yom, the word yom, is both used and defined in Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. So let's look at Genesis 1:5. Genesis 1:5. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So you use the last word, the first day, yom, and then he's defined it here. He called the light daytime, he called the darkness night, and there was evening, and there was a morning, and that was the first day. So he's defined a day and night cycle for us. Again, not consistent with this is a long period of time. He is trying to be clear about what this means. And the word, again, yom is used over 100 times in non-prophetical passages, each time 24 hours. Fourth, if the days in Genesis, the fourth reason to think is were not days at all, but geological periods, then there's going to be a problem with plants. Okay, because what day were plants created on? Third day, Genesis 9 through 13. So if plants came to existence on the third day, but days are 1,000 years long, the plants are going to struggle during the 500-year night or the 5 million year night or whatever. It can't work. Plants to be created on day 3, and then these days are really huge periods of time. A plant can't live with a long, forever long day and a forever long night. That won't work. You don't have a whole bunch of plants growing in the Arctic where you have long, multiple days, long days and multiple long nights. It's also cold there.
In verse 12, it talks about the plants yielding seeds and and the trees bearing fruit with seeds. So the trees already have fruit on them.
Right, they were created already to go.
And a tree, when they talk about the rings in the tree of the many years, how old a tree is, God created that tree with rings.
Right.
Yeah.
God could create trees fully grown. He can create fossils in the ground. It's not a problem. It's just he can create whatever he wanted. Okay, the fifth reason to not go on with this is Jesus, when he taught that man and women were here from the beginning of creation in Mark chapter 10, verse 6. So man and women were here the whole time. Paul also mentions this in Romans 1, verses 20 and 21. He states that man and woman have been here from the beginning of creation when they were perceiving the things that were made. So man and women were here from the beginning, not thousands of years or millions of years later. So that's inconsistent with the day-age theory. 6 in Genesis 1:14. Look at Genesis 1:14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." So he's talking about the stars, and you can see the stars and you see the seasons of the year. And then again, it talks about days and years, and it's like, well, if a day is not 24 hours, if a day is 1,000,000 years, then what's a year in that verse, in a season? It's like, no, we've got we know the seasons, we know the years. And then the last question to ask about this theory is, if God wanted us to know he created the world in literally 6 days, what would he tell us? And he told us exactly what he told us. He sat here and he explained there in verse 3. God would have used the word for a day. There's a Hebrew word, dor, D-O-R, which means a long period of time. If he wanted us to know it was long periods of time, he would have used that word. But there was a word for a day. And then it has the word, it's modified with the phrase evening and morning. It has numbers, as in we would number days. And then it's also defined there as we read the definition. So if you think about it, God went to every effort, multiple ways to make it clear these are 24-hour days. Okay? It could, what else would you say? I mean, I guess you could have added a sentence going, look, folks, it's not 1,000,000 years. Get over it. But it's all defined. It's all clear. And of course, we can think about those verses that we started off in this section about, a day is 1,000 years. And those really, when you put them in context, they're trying to not define a day. They're trying to talk about God's patience with humans and God's keeping his promises. So God is not bound by a 24-hour period when it comes to dealing with man. God is trying to keep his promises, and so he's willing to wait thousands of years for us to repent and do right. That's what the context of those is about. Those verses are not attempting to define a 24-hour period, a day and a night. So any comments on the day-age theory?
One thing you mentioned in my Bible, after each creation, he said it was good. Then after man, he said it was very good. Okay.
Right. And if he had created this whole, back on the previous theory, had a creation that was not good and had to destroy it, he wouldn't have said it was good.
And one last thing, in verse 20 of chapter 3, Eve was the mother of all living. So
Right.
cast out other beings before
So next week, I'll probably have one more page of handout, it'll be our last week, and we'll talk about adding time after the creation week. This is not a common theory because it doesn't align with the genealogies the Bible lays out. Thanks for the comment.